The ship was old. Not old in the way most things are old, worn down by a few decades of use. This ship was ancient beyond measure. It had traveled through the black emptiness of space for 47,000 years, carrying the last survivors of a world that no longer existed, Commander. Ethan Cole stood on the bridge and looked out at the stars. He was the 2,000th commander of this vessel. His father had commanded it before him, and his father before that, going back through generations beyond counting. Each one had carried the same duty, passed down like a sacred flame from parent to child. Remember what was taken. One day, return. The ship was called the Reclamation, and it was the flagship of what remained of humanity. 700 vessels traveled together through the void, each one a city unto itself. 4 million humans lived aboard these ships, born in space, raised in space, knowing Earth only through stories and recordings that had been preserved across the millennia. Ethan walked to the memorial wall at the back of the bridge. Every ship had one. It displayed images of Earth, the blue planet that humanity had called home before the Ruination. He saw oceans that sparkled under yellow sunlight. He saw forests so green they seemed unreal. He saw cities filled with millions of people going about their lives, never knowing that death was coming for them from the stars. The Valkyrin had come without warning. They were a powerful empire that ruled over 10,000 star systems, and they had decided that humanity was a threat. Not because humans had done anything wrong. Not because humans had attacked them or insulted them. Simply because humans showed potential. The Valkyrin did not tolerate potential rivals. In a single day, they had burned Earth to ash. 9 billion people died as fire rained from the sky. The oceans boiled. The forests became cinders. Cities that had stood for thousands of years vanished in seconds. And when the planet was nothing but a dead rock floating in space, the Valkyrin had hunted the survivors, determined to wipe out every last human being in existence. But some had escaped. A few million managed to flee on whatever ships they could find, scattering into the darkness between stars. The Valkyrin searched for them for centuries, but space is vast beyond imagination, and eventually they gave up. They recorded humanity as extinct and moved on to other conquests. That was their mistake. Lieutenant Maya Brooks approached the commander with a data tablet in her hands. She was young, only 40 years old, though human medicine had advanced so far that she would likely live for 3 more centuries. Her family had served on the Reclamation for 8,000 years. Command of the Scouts had returned, she said. You need to see this. Ethan took the tablet and studied the information displayed on its screen. His expression did not change, but inside his chest, his heart began to beat faster. After all these years, after all these generations of waiting and preparing and passing down the sacred duty, finally, Dominion has fallen, Maya continued. The Valkyrin Empire collapsed 12,000 years ago. They fought among themselves, split into factions, lost most of their technology. They control maybe 200 systems now, and those are divided between rival warlords. Ethan set down the tablet. And their military? Outdated. Their weapons are the same ones they used against Earth. They never improved them because they never needed to. Every species they faced was weaker than them. They have no idea we exist. They think we died out 47,000 years ago. Ethan walked back to the viewport and stared at the stars. Somewhere out there, in a direction his ancestors had carefully recorded before fleeing, was the space where Earth had once orbited its sun. There was nothing there now. Not even debris. The Valkyrin had been thorough, but humanity had been more thorough still for 47,000 years. While the Valkyrin grew lazy and fought among themselves, humanity had worked. Every generation contributed something. Scientists developed new technologies, each building on the work of those who came before. Engineers built better ships, better weapons, better shields. Teachers passed down knowledge and history, ensuring that nothing was forgotten. And warriors trained generation after generation, preparing for a battle that their distant descendants would finally fight. The humans of today were not the same as the humans who had fled Earth. They lived longer, thought faster, and understood science that would have seemed like magic to their ancestors. They had turned their exile into an advantage, using the long millennia to evolve while their enemies stagnated. Ethan summoned the Council of Elders. They gathered in the Great Hall at the center of the ship. Representatives from each of the 700 vessels that made up the fleet. Some attended in person. Others appeared as holographic projections transmitted across the void. Admiral Patricia Dawson was the oldest among them. She had served humanity for 280 years, and her family's service stretched back to the original evacuation. She had seen more of history than anyone else alive, and her voice carried weight that no one questioned. "The time has come," she said, and the hall fell silent. "Our ancestors watched their world burn. Their children built ships in the darkness. Every generation since has worked toward this moment, knowing they would not live to see it, trusting that their descendants would carry on the mission. We are those descendants. The debt is ours to collect." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. Ethan watched the faces of the council members. He saw determination. He saw anger that had been passed down through 2,000 generations, growing colder and harder with each passing century. He saw patience that had finally reached its end. "What do we demand?" someone asked. "What payment can balance 9 billion lives? What revenge can match the destruction of our entire world?" Admiral Dawson rose from her seat. Despite her age, she stood straight and strong. "We do not demand payment. We do not negotiate. We are not here to make deals with the creatures that burned our children alive. We are here to show them what they failed to destroy. We are here to make them understand that some crimes can never be escaped, no matter how many years pass." She turned to face the viewport, where distant stars glittered like diamonds scattered across black velvet. 47,000 years ago, the Valkyrin looked at humanity and saw a threat. They were right. They were more right than they could possibly have known. We are the threat they feared, forged in the fire of their own cruelty, hardened by millennia of patient preparation. And now, at last, we are ready. Commander Ethan Cole gave the order that evening. The fleet changed course for the first time in 10,000 years. 700 ships, 4 million humans, and 47,000 years of accumulated rage turned toward Valkyrin space. The dead were coming home, and they were coming for blood. The border world of the Surf War was not an important place. It sat at the edge of what remained of Valkyrin territory, a small planet with a small garrison, tasked with watching empty space for threats that never came. Regional Commander Vorith had held this post for 15 years, and in all that time, nothing interesting had ever happened. That changed on a quiet morning. When his sensors detected ships entering the system, Vorath studied the readings with mild curiosity. The vessels did not match any known design. They were sleek and dark, moving through space with a smoothness that seemed almost unnatural. He counted 12 of them. Though his equipment seemed to have difficulty tracking their exact positions, he opened a communication channel. "Unknown vessels, you have entered Valkyrin space. Identify yourselves and state your purpose." The response came in an old dialect of the Valkyrin language, one that had not been spoken for tens of thousands of years. Vorith had to run it through a translation program to understand the words. "We are the dead. We are the ones you burned. We are humanity, and we have returned." Vorath laughed. He actually laughed out loud at the absurdity of it. Humanity? The primitive species that had been exterminated during the third expansion? They were a footnote in history books, a cautionary tale about what happened to species that defied the Dominion. They had been wiped out so completely that not even bacteria had survived on their homeworld. "I do not know who you are," Vorith replied, "but your joke is not amusing. Identify yourselves properly, or face the consequences." The channel went silent. Then, without any warning, the 12 ships began moving toward his defense station. Vorath ordered his patrol squadron to intercept them. 6 Valkyrin warships moved to block the approaching vessels. Weapons charged and ready, Captain Daniel Morris commanded the lead human ship, the Inheritance. He had trained his entire life for this moment. He's had his parents and their parents, going back through generations beyond counting. Every simulation, every exercise, Every hour of study had prepared him for the instant when humanity would face its ancient enemy once more. "They are charging weapons," his tactical officer reported. "Standard Vulcan plasma arrays. Same technology they used 47,000 years ago."
Audio?
Daniel nodded. He had expected nothing different. Let them fire first. Let them see how little it matters. The Valkyrian ships opened fire. Bright bolts of superheated plasma streaked across space, enough firepower to destroy a small moon. They struck the Inheritance and splashed harmlessly against its shields, dispersing like water thrown at a stone wall. The human ship did not even slow down. Commander Vorath watched from his station with growing disbelief. Those plasma bolts should have torn through any known defense system. Instead, they had accomplished nothing. "Turn fire," Daniel ordered. "One shot. Show them what 47,000 years of preparation looks like." The Inheritance fired a single pulse of concentrated dark energy. It was a weapon that Valkyrian science could not explain. Born from theories they had never discovered and technologies they had never developed. The pulse passed through 3 Valkyrian warships simultaneously, and all 3 simply ceased to exist. There was no explosion, no debris. The ships and everyone aboard them were simply gone, converted into energy that dissipated harmlessly into space. The remaining 3 Valkyrian vessels turned to flee. They did not get far. Human ships moved with speed that should have been impossible, appearing in front of the fleeing enemy and cutting off their escape. In less than a minute, the entire Valkyrian patrol squadron had been destroyed. Vorath's hands trembled as he tried to send an emergency transmission to the High Council. His equipment flickered and died. Human electronic warfare systems designed specifically to counter Valkyrian technology had created a communications blackout across the entire sector. He was alone, cut off, facing an enemy that should not exist. A holographic image appeared in his command center. A human woman with gray hair and calm eyes looked at him with an expression that held no anger, no hatred, just a cold and patient certainty. "My name is Dr. Hannah Price," she said. "I am the chief historian of the United Human Remnant. I have spent my life studying the Ruination, the day your ancestors burned our world." Vorath tried to speak, but his throat had gone dry. 9 billion people died that day, Dr. Price continued. Mothers and fathers, children and grandparents, artists and scientists, farmers and teachers. Every single one of them had dreams and hopes and people who loved them. Your ancestors ended all of that in a few hours, then hunted the survivors for centuries, determined to ensure that not a single human being remained alive. She paused, and something flickered in her eyes. It might have been grief. It might have been rage. It was impossible to tell. "You failed," she said. "You thought you were thorough? You thought you had exterminated us completely. But some of us escaped, and we have spent 47,000 years preparing for this moment. We remember every name. We carry every death. And we have come to ensure that you remember them too." The transmission ended. Vorath slumped in his chair, his mind struggling to process what he had witnessed. The impossible had happened. A dead species had returned from extinction carrying weapons that made Valkyrian technology look like children's toys, and they were angry. Within hours, Desert had fallen. Human ground forces landed and took control of the garrison without significant resistance. The Valkyrian soldiers, faced with an enemy they could not hurt and could not escape, surrendered in droves, but the humans did not slaughter them. They did not torture them or humiliate them. They simply disarmed them and placed them under guard, treating them with a cold efficiency that was somehow more frightening than cruelty would have been. Commander Vorath was among the prisoners. He watched the human soldiers moving through his base. These impossible survivors of a genocide that had happened before recorded Valkyrian history. They looked so ordinary, so unremarkable. How had his ancestors ever believed they could be exterminated? A young human officer approached him. The officer's name tag read Walsh, and his face was expressionless. "The war has begun," Walsh said. "Your empire will fall. Not today, not tomorrow, but soon. And when it does, you will finally understand what you did to us." Vorath wanted to argue. He wanted to say that he personally had done nothing, that the ruination had happened thousands of generations before his birth. But looking into the officer's eyes, he understood that such arguments meant nothing. Humanity had waited 47,000 years. They had passed their rage and their grief from parent to child, keeping it alive across millennia. Personal innocence did not matter. The debt belonged to the entire Valkyran species, and humanity had come to collect it. The news spread slowly through Valkyran space. Carried by refugees and whispered in dark corners, the dead had returned. The exterminated species had come back from the void, and they brought with them weapons that could not be stopped, and a patience that could not be exhausted. The Valkyran had always believed they were the masters of the galaxy. Now they learned the truth. They had simply been waiting for their victims to return. The Valkyran High Council had not gathered in 3,000 years. There had been no need. The Empire had split into factions long ago, each ruled by its own warlord, too busy fighting the others to worry about external threats. But the news from the border had changed everything. Ancient enemies set aside their disputes and traveled to the capital world. Desperate to understand what was happening, Archon. Velith sat on the throne that had once belonged to rulers of 10,000 systems. Now it ruled over barely 200, and even those were slipping away. He was old by Valkyran standards, his scales faded, and his eyes dim, but his mind remained sharp. He had risen to power through cunning and cruelty, and he had held it through fear. But fear was a weapon that worked both ways, and now he felt it crawling through his own chest. "Explain this to me," he demanded of his advisors. "How does an extinct species return? How do primitives develop weapons that surpass our own? How did we miss them for 47,000 years?" No one had answers. The extinction of humanity had been celebrated as a triumph of Valkyran superiority. School children learned about it as an example of proper imperial policy. The idea that any survivors remained had never been seriously considered. Meanwhile, far across the galaxy, Commander Ethan Cole walked through the memorial vault aboard the Reclamation. This was the most sacred space on any human ship, a chamber filled with artifacts from the lost homeworld. Each item had been carried aboard during the desperate evacuation, saved from destruction by people who knew they would never see their planet again. Ethan stopped before a display case containing a child's toy. A small stuffed animal that had once been blue, but had faded to gray over the millennia. According to the records, it had belonged to a little girl named Sophie, who was 8 years old when the Valkyran came. Her parents had put her on an evacuation shuttle and stayed behind to buy time. Neither had survived. Beside the toy was a wedding ring, simple gold with a small diamond. A photograph showed its owner, a young woman smiling on what was supposed to be the happiest day of her life. She had died 3 weeks later, burned alive along with everyone she loved. There were thousands of these items, each one a fragment of a world that no longer existed, each one representing lives that had been stolen. Ethan's ancestors had preserved them all, passing them down through generations so that no one would ever forget what had been lost. Lieutenant. Commander Grace Murphy found him there, standing in the dim light among the relics of the dead. She had served with him for 20 years and knew him better than almost anyone, but she had never seen him look so tired. "The outer territories are falling faster than we expected," she reported quietly. "The Valkyran cannot adapt to our tactics. Their technology is too old, their strategies too outdated. We will reach their core worlds within months." Ethan did not respond immediately. He continued staring at the stuffed toy, at the faded blue fabric and the worn stitching that had somehow survived 47,000 years. "Do you know what I feel?" he finally asked. "Nothing. I thought I would feel triumph, or at least satisfaction, but there is nothing. We cannot bring back Sophie. We cannot restore the world her parents died to save. All we can do is make the Valkyran pay for what they did, and even that feels hollow." Grace stood beside him. "It is not about feeling, sir. It is about justice. About showing the galaxy that some crimes cannot be escaped, no matter how long ago they happened." Ethan nodded slowly. She was right. This was not about personal satisfaction. It was about fulfilling a duty that had been passed down through 2,000 generations. Whether it felt good or not was irrelevant. Across the war zone, Sergeant Kevin Walsh led his squad through a Valkyran slave facility on a world called Terthus II. The Valkyran had conquered dozens of species over the millennia, and most of those species now served as forced labor. The facility held thousands of slaves from a dozen different worlds, all of them working to support Valkyran industry. The slaves cowered as the human soldiers entered. They had seen masters come and go before, and each new conqueror was usually worse than the last. They expected brutality. They expected cruelty. They did not expect what happened next. Corporal Lisa Turner, the squad's medic, immediately began treating wounded slaves. She spoke gently to them, explaining that they were free, that humanity had not come to enslave them, but to liberate them. Most did not believe her at first. The concept of freedom was strange to beings who had known nothing but chains. Kevin gathered the overseers and disarmed them without violence. He did not execute them or torture them, despite what they had done to the slaves. He simply placed them under arrest and moved on. One of the slaves, an elderly creature with 6 limbs and deep scars, A.C. Ross's face, approached Kevin with visible fear. "Why?" It asked in broken Valkyran, the only common language. "Why do you show mercy? You are conquerors. You have one. Why not take what you want?" Kevin looked at the creature for a long moment. "Because we know what it means to face extinction," he said. "We know what it feels like to have everything taken from you. The Valkyran burned our world and murdered our people. We will not become what they are. We will not pass on the cruelty that was done to us." The slave did not seem to understand. Kindness from the powerful was outside its experience. But as the humans continued their liberation, moving from one facility to the next and freeing everyone they found, word began to spread. These strange beings from a dead world fought like demons, but showed mercy like saints. They accepted anyone who wished to join them. They turned no one away. An alliance began forming, not through conquest, but through hope. Species that had suffered under Valkyran rule for thousands of years saw in humanity a chance for something different. They offered their ships, their soldiers, their resources. The human fleet, already powerful, began to grow. Commander Cole received reports of these developments with quiet satisfaction. This was not part of the original plan. Humanity had prepared to fight alone, expecting no allies and asking for no help. But he understood why the other species were joining. They recognized something in humanity that the Valkyran had never shown: strength tempered by compassion, power guided by principle. The Valkyran had ruled through fear. Humanity would lead through example. On the bridge of the Reclamation, Ethan watched the tactical display showing the spreading human advance. System after system fell. The Valkyran defenders fought with desperation but could not stop the tide. 47,000 years of preparation was proving more than enough to overcome an empire that had grown lazy and divided. But Ethan knew that the hardest part was still ahead. The Valkyran core worlds were heavily defended. Their leaders, facing extinction of their own, would fight with nothing left to lose. And somewhere in the records, human intelligence had found references to ancient weapons from the Dominion's Golden Age. Terrible devices that had not been used in millennia. The war was far from over. And before it ended, humanity would face its greatest test. 6 months had passed since the first battle at Thesser IV. In that time, humanity had swept through Valkyran space like a fire through dry grass. Taking system after system with losses so small they barely registered, the empire that had once ruled 10,000 worlds now controlled barely 40, its fleets shattered, its armies broken, its people living in fear of the vengeance they had earned. Archon Velith stood in the depths of his palace on Valkyran Prime, staring at a device that had not been activated in 20,000 years. It was called the Sunbreaker, and it was the most terrible weapon the Dominion had ever created. In the Golden Age of Valkyran expansion, it had been used to punish rebellious systems by destabilizing their stars. Turning suns into bombs that consumed everything in their reach, the weapon had been sealed away. After the civil wars that shattered the Empire, it was considered too dangerous, too destructive, a relic of a more brutal time. But Velith was beyond such concerns now. His empire was dying. His people faced extinction at the hands of a species they had tried to exterminate 47,000 years ago. If he could not victory, he would have annihilation. He would burn every star in human-controlled space and let the galaxy itself share in the Valkyrin.
Oh.
Captain Amy Norton was the one who discovered the plan. She led human intelligence operations from a ship called the Silent Watch, intercepting Valkyrin communications and piecing together enemy intentions from fragments of information. When she understood what Velith was planning, she felt cold fear for the first time since the war began. She brought her findings directly to Admiral Patricia Dawson aboard the Reclamation. The old admiral listened without interruption, her face growing more serious with each passing moment. If he activates this weapon, Amy concluded, he could destroy dozens of stars, trillions of lives across multiple species. It would be the worst atrocity in galactic history. Admiral Dawson was silent for a long moment. Then she turned to Commander Cole, who had been listening from across the room. "We move on Valkyrin Prime immediately," she said. "Forget the systematic approach. Forget securing our flanks. We hit their homeworld with everything we have, and we neutralize that weapon before Velith can use it." Ethan nodded. He had hoped to approach the final battle more carefully, to minimize human casualties and ensure total victory. But there was no time for caution now. The stakes had become too high. The assault on Valkyrin Prime began 3 days later. The human fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. 700 ships arranged in patterns designed to overwhelm enemy defenses. The Valkyrin had gathered everything they had left for this final battle, but it was not enough. It was not nearly enough. Commander Cole watched from the bridge as human weapons tore through Valkyrin warships. The enemy fought with desperate courage, knowing that defeat meant the end of their species as a galactic power. They threw themselves at human vessels in suicide attacks, trying to overwhelm through sheer numbers what they could not match in technology. It did not matter. Human shields held against everything the Valkyrin could throw at them. Human weapons struck with precision that left no room for escape. Within hours, the Valkyrin fleet had been reduced to scattered remnants fleeing in all directions. But the battle was only half won. The Sunbreaker was still active somewhere beneath the capital city, and Velith still controlled it. Ground forces would be needed to find and destroy the weapon before it could be used. Ethan led the assault personally. He had not planned to, but as the moment approached, he understood that he needed to see this through himself. His family had carried this duty for 2,000 generations. He would be the one to end it. Lieutenant Commander Grace Murphy commanded the second wave, securing landing zones while Ethan pushed toward the palace complex. Sergeant Kevin Walsh and his squad were among the first boots on the ground, fighting through Valkyrin defenders who refused to surrender. The streets of the capital were ancient. Built during the golden age of the Empire, when the Valkyrin ruled unquestioned, great monuments celebrated their conquests, their victories, their absolute dominion over lesser species. Human soldiers passed these monuments without a second glance. They had not come to admire Valkyrin glory. They had come to end it. Deep beneath the palace, Ethan's team encountered unexpected resistance. Valkyrin, elite guards, the best warriors their species had ever produced, defended the approach to the Sunbreaker facility. The fighting was brutal and close. The kind of combat where technology mattered less than skill and determination. Specialist Ryan Palmer, the team's demolitions expert, took a wound to his shoulder, but kept fighting. Corporal Lisa Turner patched him up between engagements, her hands steady despite the chaos around them. They pushed forward step by step, leaving Valkyrin bodies behind them. Ethan reached the Sunbreaker chamber to find Velith himself standing at the control console. The Archon looked old and broken, his scales dull, his eyes wild. He held his hand over the activation switch, trembling with rage and desperation. "Stay back," Velith hissed. "One touch and I destroy 100 stars. Your alliance, your fleet, your precious survivors, all of them burning in nuclear fire." Ethan stopped. His weapon remained raised, but he did not fire. "You have already lost," he said calmly. "Your empire is finished. Your fleet is destroyed. This weapon is the last card you have to play, and if you play it, You doom your own people along with everyone else. My people are already doomed, Velith snarled. You have seen to that. 47,000 years you waited, and for what? To become the very monsters you claim to hate. To exterminate us as we exterminated you? No. Ethan lowered his weapon slowly. We did not come to exterminate you. We came to defeat you. There is a difference. The Valkyrin will survive this war, diminished and humbled, but alive. That is more mercy than you showed us. Velith stared at him with something that might have been confusion. Why? After everything we did, why would you spare us? Because we remember what we lost, Ethan replied. We remember the world you burned, the people you murdered, the future you tried to steal from us. And we remember who we were before you came. We were not conquerors. We were not destroyers. We were builders, dreamers, creators. The Ruination did not change that. 47,000 years of exile did not change that. We will not let you change it now. Behind Velith, Grace Murphy and her team emerged from a side passage. They had found another way in, while Ethan kept the Archon talking. Before Velith could react, he was surrounded, his hand pulled away from the activation switch, his weapon taken from him. Ryan Palmer moved to the Sunbreaker console and began placing charges. Within minutes, the ancient weapon was destroyed. Its threat ended forever. Ethan stood over the defeated Archon and felt something he had not expected. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Just a deep and weary relief. The duty that had been passed down through 2,000 generations was finally complete. Humanity had returned. Humanity had prevailed. And humanity had done so without becoming the Mon. Stirs that had tried to destroy them, the war was over. Now came the harder task, deciding what came next. The trial of Archon Velith was broadcast across the galaxy. Hundreds of species watched as the last ruler of the Valkyren Dominion stood before a tribunal composed of humans and representatives from every species that had suffered under Valkyren rule. It was the largest audience for any event in galactic history, and every eye was fixed on the scene unfolding in the Great Hall of the Reclamation. Velith stood in chains, his scales dulled by weeks of captivity, his eyes defiant despite everything. He had ruled an empire. He had commanded fleets. He had held the power of life and death over billions. Now he stood as a prisoner, waiting to learn his fate. Admiral Patricia Dawson spoke for humanity. Her voice was calm and measured, carrying the weight of 47,000 years of grief. You are charged with the continuation of genocide, she began. With the maintenance of systems designed to exterminate and enslave, with the attempted use of a weapon capable of destroying dozens of star systems. How do you answer these charges? Velith lifted his head. I answer that I did what any strong species does. I protected my people. I maintained our dominance. When humanity showed signs of becoming a threat, my ancestors eliminated that threat. It was strategic necessity, nothing more. A murmur ran through the assembled watchers. Admiral Dawson waited for silence before continuing. Strategic necessity, she repeated. That is what you call the murder of 9 billion people. The destruction of an entire world. The hunting of survivors through the void for centuries. Yes, Velith said without hesitation. Humanity was primitive, but showed dangerous potential. My ancestors recognized that potential and acted to prevent it from threatening Valkyren supremacy. They were right to do so. Look at what you have become. Look at the power you have developed. If we had allowed you to grow unchecked, you would have challenged us eventually. We simply struck first. Admiral Dawson nodded slowly. She had expected this defense. It was the logic of empire, the reasoning of those who believed that strength justified any action. She had heard it before, in history books and recordings, in the words of every tyrant who had ever risen and fallen. You speak of potential, she said, of what we might have become, but you do not speak of what we actually were. We were artists who painted beauty that has been lost forever. We were scientists who were beginning to understand the universe. We were parents who loved their children and wanted them to have better lives. We were not a threat. We were simply alive, and you decided that our lives were worth less than your fear. She turned to the great screen behind her. Images began appearing, images that had been preserved across 47,000 years. A mother holding her newborn child. A couple dancing at their wedding. Children playing in a park on a sunny day. Scientists celebrating a discovery. Artists unveiling their work. Ordinary people living ordinary lives, frozen in moments of joy and hope and love. "These are the people you murdered," Admiral Dawson said. "Not warriors, not conquerors. Just people. 9 billion people who wanted nothing more than to live their lives in peace." The images continued, scrolling endlessly, each one representing a life that had been stolen. The assembled watchers were silent, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of loss being displayed before them. Veleth's defiance finally cracked. He had never seen these images before. No Valkyrin had. The destruction of Earth had been recorded as a military operation, a necessary action against a potential threat. The victims had never been humanized. They had simply been numbers in a report, statistics in a history book. Now, for the first time, he saw them as they had been. Real people with real lives, real dreams, real loves, and he had inherited the legacy of those who had burned them all to ash. "The tribunal has reached its verdict," Admiral Dawson announced. "Archon Veleth, you are found guilty of crimes against existence. Your sentence is this: you will spend the remainder of your life in isolation, surrounded by the complete historical record of every species the Valkyrin exterminated. You will learn their names. You will study their cultures. You will understand exactly what your empire destroyed. And you will carry that knowledge until your last breath." Veleth was led away in silence. His defiance was gone, replaced by something that might have been the beginning of understanding. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. Commander Ethan Cole did not attend the trial. He stood instead on the observation deck of the Reclamation, looking out at the stars. Lieutenant Commander Grace Murphy found him there, as she so often did. "The Council has chosen a world for New Terra," she reported. "It has blue oceans and green forests. The star is similar to our original sun. It will never be Earth, but it can be home." Ethan nodded slowly. "In the Memorial Archive, it will be housed at the center of the capital. Every artifact, every recording, every name. The children of New Terra will grow up knowing what was lost and what was sacrificed to bring them home." Ethan was silent for a long moment. Then he asked the question that had been weighing on him since the war ended. "What do we become now?" Grace stood beside him, following his gaze to the distant stars. "We become whatever we choose. The Valkyrin tried to define us by our destruction. They wanted us to be victims, then they wanted us to be extinct. We refused both. We defined ourselves by our survival, by our patience, by our determination to remember." She turned to face him. "Now we have a new choice. We can define ourselves by what we lost or by what we build. I think I know which one our ancestors would have wanted." 1 year later, the first colonists landed on New Terra. They stepped out onto solid ground under an open sky and wept. These people, who had been born in space and had never known anything but the walls of ships, above them stretched blue infinity. Around them grew green plants that had been cultivated from seeds preserved since the evacuation. A gentle wind carried scents that humans had not smelled for 47,000 years. Children ran across the grass, laughing and playing under the warm sun. They were the first human children born on a planet since Earth burned, and they would grow up knowing both the tragedy of the past and the hope of the future. Dr. Hannah Price completed her definitive history of the great. Return and read the final passage at the dedication of the Memorial Archive. Thousands gathered to hear her words, and billions more watched from across the galaxy. "We were destroyed, but we did not die," she read. "We were scattered, but we did not break. We waited 47,000 years, and in that waiting, we became something the galaxy had never seen. We became the consequence of cruelty. We became the answer to extinction. We became the proof that some flames once lit can never truly be extinguished." She paused, looking out at the crowd of survivors and descendants who had gathered to honor their ancestors. The Valkyrin thought they were ending a story when they burned Earth. They were wrong. They were only beginning one. And that story will continue as long as humanity exists, as long as we remember what was taken from us, and what we chose to become in response. Commander Ethan Cole stood at the back of the crowd, watching the ceremony. Beside him, Grace Murphy reached out and took his hand. 2,000 generations, she said quietly. Your family carried this duty for 2,000 generations. What will you do now that it is complete? Ethan looked up at the blue sky, so similar to the skies in the ancient recordings, so different from the black void he had known all his life. For the first time since the war began, he smiled. I think I will rest, he said, and then I will help build something worth remembering. Something that honors everyone we lost. Something that proves we deserve to survive. The wind carried his words away, mixing them with the laughter of children and the rustle of leaves and all the sounds of a world being born. Humanity had returned. Humanity had prevailed. And now at last humanity could begin again. The stars above New Terra shone bright, and among them, somewhere in the darkness, were the ashes of a blue world that had burned 47,000 years ago. Its people were gone, but their descendants lived on, carrying their memory into a future that the Valkyrin had tried to steal. Some debts cannot be erased by time. Some flames cannot be extinguished by distance. And some species, once wronged, will cross any gulf of years to claim what is owed. Humanity had proven that, and the galaxy would never forget.